Love wins. Not always easy to believe that, not always easy to see the evidence of it around us, but it's true and it's real. So when I was a kid growing up, I absolutely loved living near the water and watching the tides come and go. I lived in a part of Florida that was really, really, really flat. Of course, all of Florida is flat by most standards, but that part of Florida was particularly so. And the county I grew up in was mostly swamp. About, I don't remember now, something like 68% was swamp. And the swamp bled into the marshes, which bled into the Gulf of Mexico. And so there were no beaches. But it was amazing to watch the tides come and go, because when the tide would go out, there would be large areas, thousands of acres, hundreds of acres, maybe, I don't know, that were now above the water, out of the water. And you'd see all this mud and marsh and stuff that looked kind of lifeless, except you'd every so often see something crawling around in it. But then once the water started coming in and it started coming up, you'd see all the little critters coming out of their little holes and coming out of the edges of the marsh and around the base of the marsh. And it just took on a whole new life. And then the tide would go back out. And you know, when the tide was out, those critters were still there and they were still alive and life was going on. It just looked different on the outside. It looked different. Yeah. So as we look at this week's news, this week's trauma, this week's horror. For me, it was a horror. I have it takes a lot of work for me to get to a place of peace around these kinds of horrible things, especially where children are involved. And you know, I've seen some things on the internet and video and Facebook and all those places where we see all these things that have encouraged people not to go back, not to find peace, not to find love, not to find peace, because that's not real spirituality. The truth is, it is. Because one can find peace, one can find harmony, one can find a place to stand, a place to rest in the midst of it that includes discontent, that includes spiritual motivation and guidance toward expressions that will change what's actually going on in the world on the outside. This teaching is about creating a world that works for everyone. And it's all about doing that from the inside out. CSL, the organization, that is our motto, creating a world that works for everyone, that recognizes the spiritual magnificence of each person. That's a tall order. I expect we'll be working on that one for a long time to come. And yet we're seeing, and we're determined to see, change and movement in the direction of a world that works for all, for everyone. So what do you do? Where do the answers lie? How do you find your way through this? And I'm mostly talking today, not preaching at you. Not that I choose ever to do that, but sometimes I do get wound up. But my point in this saying that is I really want a conversation. It's time for us to start talking about the business of creating a world that works for everyone and our individual parts in it and how that fits with the whole. We are part of a universal that we are connected to forever, can't disconnect from it, even in death, because in death we simply go to another form, to another phase, to another shape, but we're still full spiritual beings as part of that infinite, that universal. So what do we do? How do we do this? Where do we put in our energy, our attention, and our lives? You know, and what I know about dealing with the ocean, the Gulf, the Atlantic, whatever ocean you love, is that, you know, even that is interconnected with all of life. I used to think that the tides were about that the ocean was sloshing back and forth because of the spin of the earth. It just made sense because I'd seen it happening. And then later I learned, no, not sloshing, because it goes up on the various shores and back to the center. It's going this back to the center, out and back, and out and back. Because of the pull of the moon, because of the interaction between the moon, which is so far away, you think, what? As a kid, that was really hard to get my brain around, but here we are in this amazing, very powerful and very large expression of life that is bigger than the planet, that's bigger. So there are all these interconnections and all of these ways in which we connect and the ways in which we are influenced and influence one another in this quest for greater living, quest for freer living. And over the years, we've talked about it in lots of different ways and different languages. But today I would like to just remind you of a couple of things. First of all, that in recent history, there's a list going around on Facebook of 250 situations in which children are being shot at and shot in schools all across America. 250, and they're listed and named, including this latest one. And the person that sent that out and that shared also an article, Scientific American, said that from Scientific American, that there's a pattern to the people who do this, that there's a generalized anger that doesn't really have a place to go. And so the choice is either it turns in on them, they find a way to blame themselves for everything, they become so angry at themselves and often suicidal. But that's that anger, because anger is a thing that wants to externalize, it wants to express. It's an energy to help us get things done that we couldn't do otherwise. So it pushes out. And so that anger from at ourselves gets externalized to be angry at other people. And when that anger is powerless, when there's no one hearing it or responding to it or saying, this is a call for help, that child or that young adult picks up a gun and starts shooting. We've known for many years that the anger, that violence does not come out of helplessness. Violence comes out of that belief that we are not being responded to, that it has no power. That belief that it is powerless. And the last vestige of grabbing power is either to hurt ourselves or hurt someone else, because that's one place we feel perhaps we still have control. And for human beings, having that sense of control, being in charge of our lives is essential for living. So Science of Mind and this teaching of oneness says, because you can't separate what's outside and inside are simply reflections of one another, reflections of the same thing. The outward reflection of what's happening in our country is a picture of the inward reflection of what's going on in the mass humanity of this country. So that the hate, the fear, the anger, all of that stuff, we've been talking all month about these feelings and how to process and deal with them, but the fact that it's internal, spews out, expresses out, and shows up in our world. There's an interesting quote that I saw this morning on the first thing I looked at on social media. It said, in a world where we constantly think about what's wrong and what needs to be fixed and what we're afraid of, why are we surprised that what we're afraid of just keeps happening and showing up? Because we have the power within us to change all of that, but that power has to start by changing us before we can fix them. If you don't like your weight, you don't go buy a new mirror, you change your weight. If you don't like your feelings, instead of trying to fix it out there so you won't feel this way, get rid of so-and-so or make this happen differently in the world out there so maybe you'll feel better. That's called codependency on a grand scale. The solution is to look within us and find the places where we can change what we think and how we feel. Now, yes, most of us would never think of picking up a gun and hurting anyone else, much less a room full of children. But that's about degrees. That's about how much anger there is, how much feeling there is, how much helplessness we feel. So there's some things we can do within to help with how we're going to do out there. That came from Steve Farrell. He's the one who helped found and continues to carry forward the Humanity Team, which is a fascinating process on the web and emails and such. You may want to check it out. There's a lot of wonderful teachers and speakers that are available through that. But he talks about there are some ways that we can self-actualize, and that's an kind of old-fashioned term now, but to self-actualize, not that so that I can be the best, but so that we together can be the best, so that I can actualize a greater idea. I can bring into action, bring into truth, bring into reality my idea of a world where children are protected, where children are held, where children are not harmed in any way, shape, or form, and are certainly protected from one another and other things, and themselves and each other. These guys, folks, mostly guys, all guys, who have done these shootings are average age of 18. Barely, in many ways, children themselves. So to find an alternative, to get the antidote, let's look within ourselves and create a better world. And there are basically three parts to that. And the first and really important one is well, they're all important, but the first one is becoming aware of who we really are. Not who the media tells us we are, not who religions, for the most part, tell us who we are. Not, sinners needing to be saved and pulled back. Not evil, violent people, not people divided against ourselves, but who we really are on a deeper conscious level, on a deeper spiritual level, where we know and teach and believe, based on some scientific work as well as long time spiritual truth, that we are part of a unified field. That's the scientific term for it, a unified field of energy and information. Nassim Haramein is one of the scientists working with that idea. And as they study more and more of it, as the quantum physicists are looking at it, all of that, they come back to say there is within every cell of our bodies, embedded at the cellular level, that wholeness, that completeness, that goodness of the all of the capacities, all of the available power, all of the available truth, all of the available love is there and available to all of us at the cellular level. The only way we get into these places is we don't recognize and accept who we are. We aren't aware of it. We've told too many other nonsensical things, and for all kinds of reasons, quite often, but out of good intentions. Rumi said it a different way. Yeah. Rumi said, don't feel lonely. When you feel isolated and alone, the whole universe is inside of you. Stop acting small. You are the universe in motion, like the tides. Set your life on fire. See those who fan the flames. In other words, not fire of rage and anger, but fire of energy and life and truth and goodness. Get fired up about good news, not just bad news. Get fired up about what you believe in and what you want and what you see, not what you don't want and what you don't believe in and what you don't want to see. The whole world right now of algorithms is all about this business of catching our attention, either by fear or anger. So we are bombarded with those things which trigger fear and anger within us. And if we're not careful, we can get the idea that distorted view is the truth of the world. But it's not. Millions of children all across our world are being protected and cared for. That doesn't make it okay for those places where it's not, and those horrible things that are happening. But we need to keep in perspective that in the scale of things, there is still more goodness and love than there is horror and hate. That's why that song is so right on. Love wins. It always does. It's a stronger, bigger force. Hate is a distorted force of anger, and is a distorted force of love misdirected. So now becoming aware of that is really, really important. And then the next piece of it is to embrace that truth, that reality of who you are, that I live in a universal world of one power, and I can know how to live within it in a very effective way if I simply start changing how I think and feel about that. If I quit looking for the bad guys and start focusing on spending my attention with the good guys. Now, it doesn't mean I'm going to ignore those terrible things that happen. We get accused of that a lot, but it's not about ignoring. It's not about shuffling things to the side. It is about telling the truth when we see it, and embracing, though, that deeper reality of who we are. And sometimes I have some pretty angry stuff goes through me. Sometimes I get pretty frustrated, and this part of me will get triggered at times, and I will look for who should we blame here? Who's responsible? That's the other way to say it. Who's responsible for this? Right now with this thing in Texas, it's, is it the mental health system that's responsible? Is it the guns that's responsible? Is it the family that's responsible? Is it the school that's responsible? Everybody's looking to point the blame at somebody else. And yet the truth is, if you have had feelings and anger and wanting to annihilate anybody or anything by consciousness, whether you thought about doing it in the physical world or not, then you've participated in it. And the more angry you get at those who disagree, and the more frustrated you get, the more you are embracing duality, two worlds, not one, and the more you're adding to that rage and anger in the general consciousness of the human beings. So instead, embrace the truth, embrace love, find a way to love. Imagine the pain and hurt anyone who would go to that extreme must be experiencing to do so. And have compassion and love for them. Not excuse, not making excuses, not smoothing it over, but at least having compassion and love. If you've ever been in a situation where you felt desperate and lost. Because what that will do is that will heal that energy, that will bring that energy of love into a greater resonance, into a greater power in that situation for yourself as well as for them. And you embrace that also by embracing what is your inner call? What are you pulled toward? What is it that speaks to you out of all of these things? Who are you really, and why are you here? What are you about? We talked last week about your why. Why are you here? Because the answer to that question is far more important and will inform how you respond to these things happening in the world around you. They matter. You matter. And responding to those in a way that is powerful and real is what matters. And out of that call, out of that sense of what you're pulled toward, then you take action. Then you take demonstration. You demonstrate not from a place of trying to destroy something that you don't like or fix something that's wrong, but from a place of wanting to bring something that's right into the picture in a more powerful and useful way. We call that demonstration. Demonstrating is a result of changing your mind and thought, the behaviors. Some people are called to action, getting involved politically. I was called to action many, many years ago, and have still participated in the action at the level of working with mental health, working with help, supporting and loving people into finding a better expression of themselves. Nothing thrills me more than hearing someone who has shifted out of that self-hate, that self-disregard, that self-damning into a place of self-love, to a place of finding that love that is for themselves, but in loving themselves can love more people as well, and finding power and success and lots of other offshoots from that. It's pretty amazing. In In the Book of Joy, which is Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, there is this quote: "The way through the sadness and grief that comes from great loss is to use it as a motivation and generate a deeper sense of purpose." I'm going to read that again. The way through the sadness and grief that comes from great loss is to use it as motivation and generate a deeper sense of purpose. I am in the whole lifetime exploration of what it means to be spiritual and what spirituality is really all about as a result of the great loss of my father when I was 7. Think back about the things that have happened in your life where there was great loss and notice how you were motivated to do something differently. And use that to activate that motivation, to get involved in a way that can change things. Bring greater love. Learn the signs of this with kids. I've been working with teenagers since my very first ministry in 1967. And I still do. I'm going to camp in a few weeks. And I'm like, these young people are so open when they're open and so available to know better. And when you learn to see the signs, intervention at that point can make such a huge difference in somebody's life. Intervention of love, intervention of power, intervention of goodness. But it may not be yours. That may not be your call. Listen to what your heart says. Listen to what your inner guidance, your inner voice says as a result of embracing who you truly are. See, you are more than the totality of all your experiences. You are more than your history. You're more than your family history, your racial history, your racial identity, your ethnicity, your gender, or any of that. You are divine, the divine, having a spiritual, physical experience in time and space. Now, that's a big idea, but not too big for us to embrace and find a way to live. It's not about going nuts. It's about standing clearly and fully in the moment with who you are and acknowledge that. Love wins. Harold sang it well. Love wins. But it's got to start with your love for yourself. We can only love other people as much as we love ourselves. We may not recognize the love we have for ourselves, but it's there. And the deeper and clearer we see it, not an egotistical kind of I'm better than you, but true love for ourselves, recognizing and honoring ourselves, allows us the freedom then to recognize and honor others. And that's where the real power is. That's where the success is. The Center for Spiritual Living Midtown is all about that. We're all about supporting each other, teaching skills and spiritual practices that would allow us to multiply in our own minds, in our own hearts, in our own activities, and to live in the midst of all of this chaos without pretending it's not there, but also without being overwhelmed and driven by it. Instead, that which drives us is the commitment to life, the commitment to spirit, the commitment to goodness, and the commitment to a world that works for everyone. This is our truth. We stand with it because we are wonderful, and so are you, and so it is. Thank you.